What's up everybody, back with another raid guide, and today we're taking a look at normal/heroic Anduin in the new raid Sepulcher of the first ones. So let's hop into it, because it's gonna be a long one. So Little Lion Anduin, 3-phase fight with intermissions in between. Each phase works roughly the same, you just get more and more mechanics added at the start of every new phase or intermission. The main mechanics here are Blasphemy, Befouled Barrier, and Kingsmourne Hungers. Blasphemy targets everyone in the raid if there's an even amount of players. Half of the targeted players will get Hopelessness and the other half gets Overconfidence. And this debuff lasts for 8 seconds on Heroic and 10 seconds on Normal. And the name of the game is Hug It Out. Players with opposite debuffs needs to run into each other to remove their debuffs. However, if players with the same debuff, like 2 of the Hopelessness hugs, they both take around 80k damage. However, on Heroic, both players blow up in a 6-yard radius, dealing around 560k damage, so you die and anyone within 6 yards. You can, however, run over unmarked players without blowing up. You just can't touch a player with the same mark. And if you let the debuff expire, you'll also blow up. Sadly, there's not really a best way to do this, as it's in the hands of the players. One rule we followed though was, if you get Hopelessness, you stay still most of the time and let the overconfident players run into you. Of course, sometimes this doesn't pan out, everyone needs to run, they spawn far away, but it does help most of the time. Another thing to keep in mind is that on Heroic, when you blow up, you do so in a 6-yard radius, so if you're unable to clear your mark, run away from the rest of the raid. You'll probably die no matter what you do if this happens, unless you can immune it, but it's better to have one player die than half the raid if you just charge in melee with it. However, on Normal, if you can't clear your mark, you can just use a defensive cooldown and you'll most likely survive it, and it doesn't do any AoE around you. Now, for the Befouled Barrier, throughout the fight, Anduin will slam down a barrier at its location that you have to heal away. It lasts for 30 seconds and absorbs 50% on Normal and 75% of all healing done on Heroic. And this is healing done to players standing inside the barrier. After 30 seconds, if the barrier is not out-healed, it will explode, dealing near lethal damage to the entire raid, and any healing absorbed left in the barrier will instead go to the raid. So you pretty much always die if this happens. So all you healers out there, it's your time to shine. Make sure to have all healing cooldowns set up for each and every barrier. I can recommend using Viserio spreadsheets for this, or you can join the Stankie Discord where you can find my guild's healing cooldowns and timings. Next out is Kingsmourne Hungers, which is probably the most important part of the fight to get right. So every now and then Anduin will cast this ability, which is a frontal that deals a bit of shadow damage, but more importantly, players hit by this will get sent to a different realm for 35 seconds or until all the ads down there are dealt with. Now in this realm you'll find one big ad called Despair that needs to be tanked, 4 small ads called Doubt, and 4 healing ads called Hope. The 4 Doubt ads spawns at the edge of the platform and move towards Lich King in the middle, and if they reach him they vanish. And the 4 Hope ads spawn in the middle around Lich King and walk towards the edge, and if you haven't healed them to full health before they reach the edge, they vanish. Now on top of this, on Heroic, the Hope ads spawn with a dispellable debuff called Gloom, which reduces their movement speed by 80% and healing received by 100%. This of course needs to be dispelled before you start omega blasting heals into them. Now each ad you've dealt with grants Anduin willpower. The big one gives 20 and all the small ones give 5 each. And this willpower will in turn give you a huge buff during the intermission, up to 200% damage increase and 90% damage reduction, based on how well you dealt with the Kingsmourne mechanic ads. And you get 2 sets of Kingsmourne before you transition into intermission, so it's up to you to fill it up to 100% with 2 intermissions. So let's go over that a bit. So you're going to need to split your raid a bit for each Kingsmourne, as you can't send down the same player 2 times in a row, due to a debuff where they take 5000% more damage from the Kingsmourne hit, so they'll die. But you want to send down as few players as possible, as you want as many players as possible up dealing with Anduin and his shenanigans. Now what we did for this was a full clear with the first group we sent down, so 4 healing ads, 4 small ads, and 1 big ad, which gives us 60% 50% energy for the intermission. And for the second group, we cleared everything except the big ad, which gives us an additional 40% energy, and you do the math. To make this happen with our raid size, which was 23 players when we killed it, we sent down 1 tank, 6 DPS, and 2 healers in the first group. One of these kinda needs to be a necro DK, so you get the grips and the grippy hands, otherwise it's very hard to stack up all the ads. Now apart from the necro DK, you'll also want at least 1 or 2 classes that can knock. This helps push the ads towards / into the DK's grippy hands, and can be used to keep small ads from reaching Lich King, like Ring of Peace. So for example, we had our Blood DK grip 1 ad, then use Abomination Limbs and kinda walk around Lich King while our Priest and Hunter knocked ads in his direction. And once they were stacked up, we pop coolies, blast away. We used Fury Warriors, Havoc Demon Hunters, Windwalker Monks, and MM Hunters for this, as we wanted very bursty AoE damage to clear them as fast as possible. Now for the second group, we instead sent down 5 DPS, and these were mostly single target or split cleave specs, as we did not have a second DK, so stacking all of the ads up would take more time than actually just nuking them down where they spawn. So the idea is pretty much either assign 1 DPS per small ad to solo, plus 1 or 2 DPS that can spread cleave like Boomkins or Multidaughters, and then organize stuns, knocks as needed to keep him from reaching Lich King. There's less of a stress to kill ads for the second group, since you're not clearing everything. You will not come out of this realm until your debuff expires, which is after 35 seconds. Now one last very important thing to keep in mind for DPSers, the swirlies that spawn in the Kingsmourne realm. If you stand in one, you take a ton of damage, but you also deal 50% less damage for 6 seconds. So eating one of these can easily lead to not having enough DPS to clear an ad or several of them, which in turn leads to a wipe when you get to the intermission. Now for you healers out there on Heroic, the 4 ads you need to heal up, like I mentioned, they need to be dispelled before you can actually heal them. However, you don't want to dispel them just for the heck of it if you can't actually heal them up fast enough. So if you're able to just Omega blast them down, you can mass dispel them, then go ham. But if that's not working, you're probably better off by dispelling them in a staggered fashion, like 2 at a time. Again, have a game plan for how you're going to deal with them, as this can differ a lot depending on your healing comp and who you send down. Resto Shamans, for example, can almost solo 4 of these with Chain Harvest if they're Venthyr, whereas a Disc Priest might have a bad time. But wait, there's more. Now, back in the normal realm, you also get Wicked Star. Players targeted by this will get a line between them and Anduin, and after a bit, Anduin sends forth a wave of dark energy. Now, if anyone gets hit by this, they'll get silenced for 4 seconds and take around 18k damage every second during it. Now, on top of this, on Heroic, if you hit an ad with Wicked Star, it will heal them and make them immune to crowd control and interrupts. But more on that in a bit. Now, there's a few ways you can deal with Wicked Star, like assigning positions for them, assigning directions, but in the end, again, it's in the hands of the players. Our rule for this was never hit an ad, no matter what. If the choice is between a player having to dodge the star or you hitting an ad with it, aim for the players. They can run. We also tried to have most of the divine stars go out to the right side of the room, so melee could always be safe on the left, but this can change depending on boss positioning and where ad spawns, so really just keep your eyes open and make sure to not hit ads. Keep in mind that the Wicked Star's movement snapshot, so where it goes out is where it's going to return to, even if the boss moves away. But ideally you want to move boss as little as possible during Wicked Stars, but sometimes you have to. And lastly, for this phase 1, there's Hopebreaker, Domination, Word Pain, and Dark Zeal. Hopebreaker is just a raid-wide AoE followed by a stacking dot, and this resets when Anduin reaches 100 willpower, so intermission. And Domination, Word Pain, Anduin throws a dot at a random player, so healers just keep an eye on them, and players with this dot should avoid soaking the Befouled barrier without defensives, or at the very least be prepared to jump out of the barrier if you're low. And Dark Zeal, which is the tank mechanic here, anytime Anduin slaps, he slaps faster. So each consecutive melee attack against the same target increases his attack speed by 7%. So after a while he slaps pretty darn fast. Now the stacks reset when he slaps someone else, so the biggest tip I can give you here is make sure to reset stacks before one tank gets sent down to the Kingsmourne realm. Just have that tank taunt a few seconds before the Kingsmourne cast so you get the reset. Now keep in mind that the damage ramps up faster and faster and faster for Anduin, so save trinkets and cooldowns for higher stacks, and use something during the Befouled barrier to allow yourself to stay in the absorb a bit longer. But of course you always want to move out of the barrier if it's unsustainable. So, how do we deal with all of this? On pole, tank Anduin close to the middle and always aim his Kingsmourne slaps in towards the middle. Where you get hit by this is where you spawn and where you get out from this realm, and the middle just worked the best for us. When you get the first barrier, everyone stack and healers pump away. Make sure to move out of the barrier if you're low on HP and healers can't keep you up. Shortly after the first barrier, you will get your first blasphemy marks. Pre-spread during the blasphemy cast and hug away. This part of the fight will take a few pulls to get right and tempers may or may not flare. After marks, you get your first Kingsmourne. Group 1 goes in and full clears all adds. Now, players in the first Kingsmourne group, keep in mind that you have to spread as soon as you get out of this realm if it overlaps with blasphemy. And sometimes those players didn't get a circle for a few seconds but could still blow up before they could actually see their color, so just spread as soon as you get out. Best bet is to get out a few seconds before blasphemy or a few seconds after. Now, shortly after second barrier and second marks, you get your second Kingsmourne. Clear 4 small adds and 4 healing adds. Tanks remember to reset stacks before the second tank goes down. And remember that this group will take the full 35 seconds before they get out. So the active Anduin tank that stays up will get slapped a lot due to high stacks, so plan your defensives accordingly, and second group tank needs to instantly taunt when they get out. And now it's time for Intermission. During Intermission, if you full cleared first Kingsmourne and all small adds in second group, you'll have 200% damage increase as well as 90% damage reduction as you enter the Lich King Intermission. But do not let that fool you, things still slap to high heaven. So as the Intermission starts, you'll be able to hit the manifestation of the Lich King that spawns, and you no longer deal any damage to Anduin, but all damage you deal to Lich King is shared with Anduin. So now, throughout this Intermission, swarms of fiendish souls spawn from LK's army of the dead that you have to deal with, and he will use army twice every intermission. Now, the fiendish souls will leap at random. Players seem to prefer range, deal some damage and apply necrotic, which reduces your healing / absorb taken by 5% per stack. Now on heroic, when these die, they also leave a swirl on the ground. Stand in it and you die, so avoid doing that. On heroic, you'll also get 1 monstrous soul per intermission, and these slap a bit harder than the fiendish souls, and it loses 1% HP every second, but gains 5% physical damage every second. But most importantly, this add, once it reaches 30%, will start casting necrotic detonation. And if it goes off, it is a wipe. Now, apart from this, the raid takes a metric ton of ticking damage that ramps up throughout this phase. And tanks will have to deal with the ever annoying Soul Reaper ability from Lich King, which deals a big chunk of physical and Shadow Frost damage, so magic damage, to its target, which also increases physical damage taken by 150% for 15 seconds. On top of this, whenever Lich King uses Soul Reaper, he gains 100% attack speed for 8 seconds. And to add insult to injury or some salt in the wound, he casts Soul Reaper too often, so you'll always have to tank Lich King for a few seconds with the increased physical damage taken. And most of that is while Lich King has 100% increased attack speed, so keep that in mind. The tank that gets Soul Reaper takes a big chunk, but the off-tank that taunts will instantly start getting smacked as well. Use them defensives well. So how do we deal with all of this? Well, first intermission, we move Lich King back to the side just a little bit. It helps to get him more stacked when they spawn. Range, move out a few yards and spread. All DPS goes on Lich King, but you cleave down all the small adds. So you're gonna want heavy AoE blasters, and you want to have a stun / CC rotation for all the small adds, like binding shot into vortex knock, into leg sweeps, you name it. It's just to keep him from leaping out as much as possible. Necro DK's grippy hands, for example, is also extremely useful here, as is mass grip. Now on heroic, keep an eye on the big add, the monstrous soul. When it reaches 40%, have everyone swap and nuke it down, so you beat the necrotic detonation cast. If your DPS swaps to it when it starts casting, you're a bit too late. You want him to already be smacking as it starts to cast to make sure you make it. Now when you get to the second intermission, it's pretty much rinse repeat with the added mechanic March of the Damned. All across the room, walls of spooky skellies spawn and walk across the platform. Get hit by one, you get stunned, and then you die. So while dealing with all of the small adds, the entire raid needs to be on their toes and ready to move instantly if skellies spawn near you or are walking towards the raid. We had a few markers around the edge of the platform, and I just called where I went with the boss all the time, like skelly spawning, move square. But apart from that, it plays out the same. Swap on monster's soul when it's low, CC stun small adds, keep him stacked, range be a bit spread, and now get hit by the spooky gang. Lastly, make sure you've killed most of the small adds before the intermission actually ends, as when it does you lose all your 200% damage increase and the adds takes a lot longer to kill. Moving on! After your first intermission, phase 2 starts, which is phase 1 plus Grim Reflection adds. So the actual phase plus Kingsmourne realm plays out exactly the same, but you now get 3 adds that spawn in the normal realm. Kuwewe the Pikata! They can spawn in 5 different locations, and these are set. However, which one of those the 3 adds will spawn in is random. Either way, you want to tank Anduin next to one of these and crowd control the other 2. Once the first one is dead, move Anduin to the next one, etc, etc. These adds, while not crowd controlled, will spam Psychic Terror, which is a raid-wide fear that deals a ton of damage. It is interruptible, so you want to have an interrupt order for them. Now, to make this a bit easier, we usually kept Anduin in the middle, so if there was an ad spawned there, we'd start smacking it instantly and crowd control the other 2. If none spawned in the middle, you can either always go for the closest one or always the skull-marked one or something. Now, it's important to keep in mind that if you hit one of these reflections with a Divine Star on Heroic, you cannot interrupt it, and it will pretty much heal to full health, which is why you have to go out of your way to make sure that they do not get hit, and other players just have to move. So you deal with 2 sets of Kingsmourne, 2 sets of Grim Reflection adds, and then second intermission starts. Make sure you kill all the Grim Reflection adds before the second intermission starts, or they get super buffed and you cannot interrupt them. We popped Bloodlust during second intermission as it lined up well with cooldowns and helped us kill the big adds in time. But you can always use it in the first intermission as well, as there's less movement there if you need more Anduin damage. But second intermission is rougher on the raid due to the extra movement. Now, following the second intermission, we had Anduin at around 17%, but you can do it even if he's at like 20%, you just have to play phase 3 a bit better than we did on our first kill. But obviously, the lower Anduin is, the easier phase 3 gets. Now, phase 3 has a few new upgraded mechanics, and he's lost some abilities. There's no Grim Reflection adds, there's no healing barrier, and no domination word. However, blasphemy has changed to hopelessness, so everyone in the raid gets the same debuff circle around them. And if they touch another player here, they go boom. So to help us with this, Anduin has a beacon of hope barrier in the middle of the room. If you go into it, it removes your hopelessness debuff and decreases in size. But it also gives everyone in the raid a dot that deals a bit of damage over 3 seconds, but it stacks, and new applications refresh the timer. So you want to clear between 4 or 5 players or hopeless debuffs at the same time, wait for the dot to drop and healers to be comfy, then cleanse 4 or 5 more. If possible, have someone call out groups or players to go cleanse themselves. It makes it less hectic, and players be ready to make space and position yourself so that debuffed players can reach the barrier fast and easy. But we also had everyone with immunities use their immune on the first set of hopelessness in phase 3. Now, important to note, you do not immune the application of the mark, but rather the expiration of the debuff. So when there's a few seconds left, move away from the raid and immune. The reason you want to immune some of these is because the beacon of hope barrier is not infinite. Every time you cleanse a player, it shrinks and eventually it's gone, and you can't cleanse and you die. So it's just to extend it a bit. Other than that, he also has a empowered hope breaker, which deals several pulses of AoE damage to the raid now and applies a stacking dot. Just heal for it. And that's pretty much it. Phase 3 is really the easier phase, if you will. We killed it on our very first try getting to phase 3, and we kind of whittled the boss down the last 5% with more than half the raid dead. And that worked fine. I mean, it died. So the DPS check did not feel rough at all in that phase, and Anduin has since been nerfed by 5%, or his HP has, so it's even easier now. But yeah, that is it for this fight on normal and heroic. We'll of course be making a mythic guide once we get to mythic Anduin. Now, if you have any questions at all about this encounter, hit me up in the comments or become a patron or Twitch sub and get access to the Stankie Discord, where you can find raid week auras, healing notes, and a ton of awesome people to help you during progression. Don't forget the usual stuff: like, comment, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. It really helps me out. I'm also streaming all of our progression on Twitch, so make sure to check that out. It's on Thursdays and Sundays now, and I raid with a Swedish guild, so comms will be a bit swinglish. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.